Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railways, Dorion, and then subsequently Kinghorn Subdivision. We are here in Pass Lake, the community of Pass Lake, which is located in the municipality of Shunya, Ontario. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be picking up from a previous hike. We're actually going to be redoing a section here that we've previously done, and the reason why we're redoing it, there's some new information and we want to sort of update the video. So right off the hop here, even though we've kind of talked a little bit about Pass Lake Station already, we're right at the location of Pass Lake Station, just across the street there where you see the sign for Karen's Country Kitchen. Now, I don't know if the business is open anymore, but this was the section house here at Pass Lake. So Pass Lake was an original station on the line, so back when it opened in 1915. There wasn't really a station building per se, but basically there was a section house, there was a water tank. Now the water tank, I've not been able to locate where it is, and I'm guessing it's kind of hiding. It was somewhere in this area here, because a local resident told me that the intake pipes, someone is pulling me like crazy here, the intake pipes for the water tank were just right across there, right in Pass Lake, and they came across to here. And basically there's a pile of concrete right there. You can see these beautiful ridges here, and this is going to sort of tie in with our story here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you along beside the road here. I've got Luna on a leash because it's a little bit dangerous. So basically the station here kind of had a checkered history. So it did have a water tank. Now what's interesting is that there was a water tank back at Dorion. So Dorion's about 20 miles to the east. And so remember, we've talked about this, that in the old days, because the locomotives were small, they had to have water tanks every 20 miles or so, because the older, earlier locomotives had limited tender capacity for their water. So they had to stop every 20 miles to take on water. So there was a water tank every 20 miles. So there's one at Dorion, which is milepost 100, let's say 99.9 or whatever it is. There was one here at milepost 120, and then there was one up at Silver Harbor, which is not 20 miles from here, but it basically was kind of halfway between here and Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay. So eventually in the 1930s, they removed the water tank at Dorion, but they left the one here. And so the water tank, which again is right there, and if you click on the link in the description, that'll take you to my page on Pass Lake, you'll actually see a photograph that was taken, I assume, in the 1920s, and you'll see the section house and you'll see the water tank right about here. That water tank remained, I believe, until 1957. So right here, this is actually the siding. So the siding starts way back there and it comes across. So here was the main track right here, and the siding was just right beside it here. They've done some road work in the last few years. We'll talk about the demise of the rail line, but basically they widened the road a little bit. There used to be a railing on the side here, and basically the rail line was on the other side of the railing. So right in this rock cut here, this is where the siding ended. And so the siding here kind of went back and forth. It was a siding, and then there was a period of time there where basically it was converted into a spur, and then it became a siding again. And then the station here, it's here in 1996, and basically it disappears after 1996, because it's not here. Pass Lake is not a station when the line is discontinued in 2005. So I'm going to show you some, I'll show you some timetables and things like that. Show you some maps. Maybe we'll hold off on the maps, but I'll definitely show you the timetables, because I want to talk about the maps in a second. So as I mentioned, as we were walking by, we're trying to take a look at where this water tank may have been. Again, there was apparently a set of uptake pipes just across there into Pass Lake. And what you see here, there's some concrete over there, and then you see a pile of concrete here. There's concrete here. Kind of hard dragging the dog with me here. And there's concrete here. And there's concrete here. You see slabs of concrete. So these could have very well been the feet of the water tank. Just looking around here if I see anything else. So, I mean, it had to be somewhere in this location here. You can see there's concrete all over the place here, right? So essentially this may have been where it was, and then it was demolished, right? Also in here. So if you took a metal detector, you might be able to find some remnants of it, but it had to be right here. So because there's the section house, we see the picture, and it was right in there. There's some concrete over there as well. So the water tank had to be here, and obviously it was demolished at some point. Okay, let's continue on. So let's start with our history of the rail line as we normally do. Again, come on, Luna. So again, this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambitions. The Canadian Northern Company got its start in Manitoba in 1896, buying up some charters and some old rail lines and things like that. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is just a little ways that way to the west. So they constructed that line between Port Arthur and Winnipeg, which was opened in 1902. And so shortly thereafter, they began building lines all throughout the Canadian prairies. Canadian Northern actually became sort of synonymous with the Canadian prairies. Around the same time, they began the same process in southern Ontario, acquiring lines and building some trackage north from Toronto, eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area. So it was around about that time that Canadian Northern realized that the long-term viability of their company depended on building a transcontinental connection. There was competition that was heating up. There was another company, Grand Trunk, that was looking at partnering with the Canadian government to build another transcontinental line. So the problem was Canadian Northern didn't want to build certain sections of this transcontinental line. And of course, nobody wants to build through the mountains of British Columbia because it's very difficult. And they didn't want to build this section. Excuse me, they didn't want to build between the end of steel at Sudbury, which is near Ruel, and Port Arthur. And the reason being was it was a very long stretch. It was 550 miles. It was going to be very difficult construction, and we're going to be talking about that construction here in a second. And then therefore it was going to be very expensive. So one of the things that Canadian Northern did was they attempted to do things like some running rights agreements. They wanted to try to get a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific. Now, one of the areas where they were very keen on doing that was this area, and this kind of ties in with the story here. So Canadian Northern wanted to get a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific for the 70 miles or so from Port Arthur to Nipigon. Nipigon is to the east of us here. And the reason for that was because when the Canadian Pacific had been built through this area, and so the Canadian Pacific had been built, had opened in 1885, and this construction in this area had kind of gone on sort of 1884, 1885-ish. And Canadian Pacific had basically acquired the best route. So when Canadian Northern couldn't get agreement with Canadian Pacific, they had to build. And one of their big issues was building through this area. So what they did was they had to go south. Railways don't like to cross each other, okay? They don't like to, because you have to get permission and it's a pain in the butt. They didn't want to cross the Canadian Pacific line. So they had to come on the south side of the Canadian Pacific line. So they had to hug the shore of Lake Superior. Now the problem is that when you get to this area, the Canadian Pacific line had basically run to the north of this big rock ridge that you see here. So we're basically at the top end of something known as the Sibley Peninsula. So this is a peninsula that juts out, and after you're going to see some maps and stuff, so you can basically see that shown on the map. And there's all kinds of rock ridges through here. So you basically get to this rock ridge. Canadian Pacific had taken the northern route around the rock ridge. So now the problem is Canadian Northern has to find a way around this rock ridge. You don't want to go through it because the rock ridge is huge. So basically what they had to do was they had to build a massive trestle, massive viaduct across the Blend River Valley, which that's our destination today. And then they had to find a way around here. So they basically skirted the south side of this ridge and essentially ended up here. And so you can kind of see there's a ridge there and there's a ridge here and there's a narrow little area here. So this area became known as the Pass. Now, I don't know if that's what inspired the name of this area. This is Pass Lake here. Okay, so again, beautiful fall day. It's Canadian Thanksgiving. It's the Sunday of Canadian Thanksgiving, so our long weekend here. Beautiful day, no wind, which has been great because it's been super windy the last few days. So basically this area, this pass, allowed the railway to come through. The only problem is now they had to basically swing around this rock ridge and then go back around that way, and it basically added 5 miles of construction to the line, which in essence was easier than actually going through that rock ridge, because that would have been just an engineering nightmare to try to do that. So anyway, going back to the original story, that Canadian Northern didn't want to build through this area because of problems like this. Again, eventually they did have to build. They had to build through sections like this. So this area was under construction very early on. So 1912, they started construction on the viaduct, and the viaduct was done by the end of 1912. It opened in early 1913. So the viaduct itself is 110 years old. So eventually they got the line completed. So New Year's Day 1914, the last spike was driven. Again, you can see these beautiful rock ridges. So the rock in here is the reason why it's called the Sibley Peninsula is because the geological feature is called the Sibley Group, and you can see it's kind of this very layered rock. You'll see lots of red colored rock, lots of iron content in the rock itself. So New Year's Day 1914, they completed the line, and then the line opened for traffic in 1950. Now, shortly thereafter, Canadian Northern began running into some problems, and basically those problems were sort of associated with financial issues, right? So basically cost of construction, for example, the construction through this area, and maybe we'll pause here for a second and I'll show you those maps of this area. And then also because of World War I, a lot of the financial markets were in turmoil, and this railway had depended a lot on bonds and things like that for construction. And so by 1917, the company was basically insolvent, had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And in 1918, late 1918, the Canadian Northern Company was merged, amalgamated, whatever descriptor that you want to use, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines called the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger produced Canadian National railways. Now, the nationalization process took several years to complete. So by 1923, the Grand Trunk lines had been absorbed and Canadian National Railways was sort of as it was. Now, in 1923, the name of this line changed. It had originally been the Nipigon Subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway, and then it changed to the Dorion Subdivision of Canadian National Railways. Now, unfortunately, in 1923, CN built a cutoff that basically relegated this line to secondary status, and so it was no longer part of the main line, unfortunately. So the Dorion subdivision continued until 1960 when CN did a big reorganization, and so the Dorion subdivision was merged with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, and that merger produced the Kinghorn subdivision running all the way from Long Lac to Port Arthur. And so the Kinghorn continued running until 2005 when CN decided to discontinue service, and the rails were pulled up between 2008. Actually, they were working on this area in 2008, pulling up the rails, and that process was complete by 2010. Okay, so we've basically reached the end. Sorry, I'm panning back into the sun here, but we've basically reached the end of this sort of initial section here. And so you can see the railway line leaves the road and sort of veers off to the side. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue following the grade here, and we're going to work our way all the way up to the Blend River Viaduct.